Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Authors on the Air. I'm your host, James Latwell, and today we have Gregg Hurwitz. And Gregg is a New York Times bestselling author, and his new book is Nemesis. It's the 10th book, if you can believe that, in the Orphan X series. And I have to say, this was a blast to read, Gregg. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did a lot. For folks who haven't run across this incredible series, who is Orphan X?
Well, Orphan X is an assassin for the government, but not just a normal assassin. He was taken out of a foster home at the age of 12, and he was trained in a silo separate from everybody else. And he basically was trained to be an expendable weapon. That's why they recruited kids into the orphan program out of foster homes. But one of the twists is that his handler becomes like a father figure to him. He actually loves this kid. So rather than it just being this grueling upbringing where he's treated like a disposable object, it actually puts him in the world. Out of this East Baltimore foster home, he learns language and etiquette and mixed martial arts fighting and hand-to-hand combat and knife fighting and culinary things and military history. And his handler and father figure, Jack John, says to him when he's young, he says, the hardest part is not going to be making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And in a lot of ways, what the series is about this assassin who is trained to think of the world in black and white terms. It's his process of becoming more human. And it's just wrapped in these installations of what I hope are kick-ass thriller stories.
And they definitely are. I mean, in Nemesis, Evan's path collides with probably his only friend in the world, and it just takes a completely left turn for Evan and Tommy. But could you tell folks a little bit about the story in Nemesis?
Yeah, well, part of the process of becoming more and more human means that Evan's life gets exponentially more complicated, right? If he was a true believer, things would have been easier. He'd be in the orphan program. He'd just be killing people. But at a certain point, he leaves the orphan program and becomes basically a pro bono assassin. He has an encrypted number, 1-855-2-nowhere. You can call that number and you can see if anybody answers it, if you're in the United States at least. And part of that is he wants to take on missions that are aligned with his own moral compass. But part of becoming more human means that you have relationships that become more intimate. And one of the things I say about Evan, with everything he was taught, explosives, breaching, sniper weapons, knife fighting, he never learned to speak the strange language of intimacy. But here he has this friend, Tommy Stojak, who's this crusty, he's a former UDT diver in the Navy, early Navy SEAL days. He's an armorer. He's an ordnance expert, and he's become Evan's closest friend through this whole series. And part of becoming more human means that when you have these intimate relationships, they're really messy. They interfere. Evan's have very kind of OCD. He has his world in very black and white terms, and nothing will interfere with that than like a genuine relationship. And his code, Evan's unbreakable assassin's code that's enshrined in the 10 Assassin's Commandments that are given him by Jack, becomes on a collision course with Tommy and Tommy's code and some things that Tommy has done. And so you have this case for the first time where Evan is up against the target of his mission is his best friend in the world. And how is he going to navigate this? How is he going to navigate this emotionally? How is he going to navigate it psychologically? And so it's really, these two close friends squaring off based on this collision of their code. And what we're really waiting to see is if Evan is going to be this relentless force of destruction and complete the mission as he always has, or are they going to figure out a way to reconcile and to have their friendship and their personal relationship rise above these concerns and this collision of codes between two very tough men?
Yeah, and I think you lay it out really well because, Evan has come up across some red lines that he's drawn for himself, and he's going to have to see, how much he's willing for that to bend. So it was a great story. It is a page turner. Once folks get into this, there's going to be some late nights, getting through it. So I love that.
Thank you.
Evan, as you mentioned, he has very few attachments in his life. Tommy was one. But there's another character that's really well drawn, and that's Joey. who kind of, helps him through this story here. How did you come to create a character like her? Because she's really unique, and I really enjoy the parts of this where she's on the page, because she adds another level of complexity to his life.
Well, so Joey, we first meet in the third Orphan X book, which is called Hellbent. And that book, excuse me, is really about Evan. He gets stuck with this kid on a mission. It's the last thing he wants. She's this 16-year-old washout from the orphan program. She's a brilliant hacker. She's tough as hell. She knows how to fight. But she's really a prodigy when it comes to hacking. And he's stuck with her through the course of this third book when he really wants to be on a sort of man on fire mission of revenge. And he's got this young charge with him that he doesn't know what the hell to do with. And she's emotional, and she's, and basically what happens is they come to really establish an incredible relationship. I think in a lot of ways, she's the primary relationship with Evan over the course of these books. She calls him her uncle person. She's like equal parts kid sister and niece and daughter to him. And they have this really incredible relationship that's grown and has developed a lot. And I was supposed to kill her. I had every plan to kill her at the end of Hellbent.
No
And
kidding.
in fact, when you read it, you can see precisely the scene where that would have taken place. And what happened instead was, having her there, she brought out so much richness in Evan, and so much humor, and so much texture, and so many moral and ethical problems for him. I just couldn't stand not having her around. It's like she shines this light on him, and Evan can be a little bit more flat and focused. And the light from Joey brings out all of these facets in him, and kind of makes him glow, and makes the stories glow. So I couldn't bear to part with her. And she's been in every book since then.
I'm glad you didn't, because you're right. I mean, you saw a lot of reflection from her. I'm gonna have to go back and look at Hellbent now and see if I can pinpoint that scene. That's great. Now, Evan is always on the trail of, somebody responding, looking for help, and now we've got this very odd Hickenlooper family that he runs into in Nemesis. They're really a unique kind of package that he has to deal with. And again, Tommy is kind of inserted into that. How did you come up with that particular milieu, or that family, and everything that happens, without having too much away in the story? Because it's really well done, and that you can almost picture that environment that they're in down there.
Well, I wanted there to be a real collision of codes, and Tommy's very rural red state. He's a hardcore gun guy. He's a big Second Amendment guy. And Evan is equally forceful and tough, but Evan grew up in an urban foster home. He grew up in an East Baltimore foster home. He was one of the only white kids in the foster home he came up in. And the world he comes out of is this really tough, rough and tumble life. But the people who were his people were from that milieu. And Tommy goes back to this town, and there's these guys, this collection of young men who they call themselves, they're in a militia. It's really not. They're really a train wreck of trying to figure out what the hell they are in the world. They have all kinds of grievance. They have a lot of casual racism. Like they're sort of a mess. They're exactly the kinds of characters that a lot of people in the mainstream don't take time to humanize or think about. And so part of the conflict between Evan and Tommy in a lot of ways is, Tommy is like, these are my people. These are my fuck ups. You have yours. You have all the people you look out for. And so what happens with this code is there's a lot of themes in this about negotiation, about forgiveness, about bringing people along rather than just labeling them and moving into greater polarization. Even when we're starting out from a position of these young men who you could think about as being really sort of extremists in a way that is incredibly unpalatable to the main culture. And Tommy's process of dealing with them and trying to do right by them and humanizing them, because Tommy is real to Evan, in turn, what happens with these kids becomes real to him too, or becomes a very real story, rather than these are just these asshole racist militia boys who need to be killed. The story's a lot more complicated than that.
It is, and there's a couple of points where you see Evans start to shift and evolve a little bit, where lines start to blur, and like you said, he identifies these people now with Tommy, and not so much as just these militia folks. And I do see kind of the emotions coming through more and more in Evan, and he's not comfortable with those.
No, I mean, he was trained to keep all that shit in a box, you know, and
Right.
here he is up against his best friend and he's trying to hold to his code. But in a lot of ways, you know, how do we change our mind when it comes to matters that are deep, whether they're political or cultural or psychological or spiritual? It's always through a relationship. It's through a relationship with somebody. I mean, and they're foxhole brothers. I mean, they've been in it together. And so his great affection for Tommy and vice versa, as much as in almost any other circumstance, these two guys would just be ready to kill each other. But there's so much more there. There's so much more that forces Evan to try to figure out how he should see and contend with this situation. It's so much more complicated. You know, one of the things I think about is that reality is where ideology goes to die. You know, when you deal with the real world, you deal with real people, whatever abstract notions you have, whether it's ideology that's political, whether it's even Evan's code that's based on more abstract principles, he's dealing more and more with flesh and blood humans. And that's tough. Humans are complicated.
Yeah, and I think Evans kind of bumping up against that much more, and it was really interesting to watch that play out in Nemesis.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
asked, yeah, no, I asked a question, Bob Craze recently. I'll ask the same question to you. If Evan Smoak and Joe Pike are in a room together, what does that sound like?
What does it sound like? Well, first of all, they're both pretty taciturn, so there's not going to be a lot of conversation. It's not like if you threw
Right.
Luke Devine in there, they'd be like rabbiting with discussion. To be honest with you, one of these questions that gets asked a lot is like, who would win in a fight? You know, Jack Reacher or Joe Pike? Um, Evan is a very minimal possible force person. I'd like to think if he's in a room with Joe Pike, they'd get along pretty well. I think their codes align. I think there's a pretty good Venn diagram about the ways that those guys function and the codes that they have in the world. So, probably wouldn't be a lot of discussion, but I think there'd be a lot of respect.
Yeah, it'd be a quiet room, but yeah, I think there'd be that agreement there. So, where do you see Orphan X going next?
Well, the end of Nemesis is a really huge shift in the ethos of the series.
Yeah,
I don't want to give anything away, but there's a very big change that comes across with Evan of a way that he has to think about how he conducts his missions. And it's quite pronounced. And there's nothing after this book is going to be the same as what came before us. That's for sure. And so the next book is moving us into a new place, but he's going to carry the ramifications of what happens in these last chapters of Nemesis with him.
yeah. No, I could see that for sure. We're going to end with something we call three quick hits, and that's three quick questions in Evan's headspace. And I think these won't be too difficult for you. What's Evan's favorite cocktail? What does he like to drink?
Vodka up, freezing cold, shaken till his hands adhere to the shaker.
Absolutely. That's always fun to see what he drinks in these books. What's his favorite music? What does Evan listen to?
He's not actually a very big music guy, which is interesting. he's kind of ill at ease when it comes to entertainment. He likes, one of the things he likes is watching Buster Keaton movies on occasion because he used to watch those with Jack. But for music, it's not something he gravitates to. It's not something he really spends a lot of time with. Jack listened to classical music and he listened to opera. And so that's in Evan's training and in the way he thinks about the world. I think that's a big part of it for him. But he doesn't put those records on. He doesn't put the vinyl on the way that Jack did when he was a young kid sitting at his knee in his study.
Sure. And then finally, what's Evan's greatest fear?
That he will never figure out how to comfortably be in connection and in community with other human beings.
Yep. That's his struggle. Folks, we've been talking with Gregg Hurwitz, the author of the new Orphan X book, Nemesis. And Greg, I have to say, this is my favorite one of the series. I mean, I've hit them all, and this one, there's something special about it. So congratulations. It's a great book.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted. I'm really delighted to hear it. And I'm looking forward. I have my biggest tour I've had in years. I'm going to be all over America, heading out
cool.
starting on February 11th. So I'm looking forward to seeing and talking to readers about this one. That's for sure.
A good deal. Folks, it's coming out on February 11th. So if you see Greg in your community, go get in line and grab this book. You're going to love it. So Greg, thanks for spending some time with us on Authors in the Air.
My pleasure. We'll talk soon. Take care.
You bet. Take